Ty, welcome to Career Cloud. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Before we get into everything, I just want to kind of preface the discussion for our listeners with an interview question, and for them to kind of keep in mind, actually, and hopefully it sets the stage a little bit for what we're going to talk about. So this is a famous question from PayPal co-founder and venture capitalist Peter Thiel that he uses to interview candidates, and it goes like this: what important truth do you believe that very few people would agree with you on? And since I first ever heard this question and thought about it, my answer has been that people can change. And so I wanted to kind of just use that for our audience to kind of think about as we get into this discussion. So, just with that being said, really, thank you for being here and sharing your story. And I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Glad to have the opportunity.
Excellent. So why don't we start with, before we get into your backstory and everything, why don't we start with what you do today? Give our listeners an idea of what you do day to day with Recovery Career Services.
Sure. I do a variety of things that are kind of developed, around the workforce development space. Recovery Career Services is my 501c3 nonprofit that I began based on my personal experiences. And what we do is provide no-cost career coaching and employment guidance to individuals that are in recovery from addiction, homelessness, and past criminal justice involvement. The challenges for folks that are rebuilding their lives and trying to re-enter the workforce are pretty unique. So certainly there's some things in common. Everybody needs to interview, everybody needs to have a resume, but the way that you tell the story of what's happened in your history and the way that you try to make an employer comfortable with, in many cases, taking a chance on you, are vastly different than what most job seekers have to go through. So to the best of our ability, we try to help folks navigate those waters and get back into sustainable work.
Excellent. And as part of that, you do some speaking and other types of consulting with employers. Is that correct?
That is correct. Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so talk to us a little bit about your personal backstory. What kind of led you to doing this work?
A very twisty road, quite frankly. It's not the kind of work I ever thought that I'd be involved in. I was fortunate enough in kind of the early to mid 2000s to work for a Fortune 50 company as a sales and business development representative, and was pretty successful. Had received some national recognition for sales achievement and got some awards, but I also had a secret, and that secret was that I was a pretty hardcore alcoholic and drug addict. And it kind of started taking a toll on my personal life way before it took a toll on my professional life. So my personal life had frankly been a wreck for quite a while, but professionally, I was able to outachieve some of the things that were happening in my personal life, at least for a while. Unfortunately, they caught up with me. And, although I went to rehab and although I tried a number of things to prevent myself from falling any further than I did, eventually in 2014, I ended up as a homeless addict on the streets of Seattle, and really spent the next couple of years of my life going through a series of pretty painful things, quite frankly. I was in and out of jail repeatedly. I was committed to a mental institution. I was, in that time, of course, completely unemployable. And even, was lucky enough, and I'm sorry if this makes some people uncomfortable, but I was fortunate enough to survive a couple of suicide attempts. And when I finally was ready, really, to get sober and start putting my life back together in 2016, I was surprised to find out that the great work experience that I had in the past, which is, over 10 years of great corporate experience, and the fact that I had an MBA from one of the best universities in the country, the University of Washington, didn't really help me a whole bunch, because people only saw that I'd been out of work for a couple of years and that I had criminal convictions. And despite all the advantages and the things that I'd been lucky enough to have on my resume, the first job I was able to get was part-time as a janitor. And now that is needed work. And that job actually did a lot for me. But as I progressed further in my sobriety and kept thinking about ways that I could help other people who might be walking the same journey, I kept coming back to this idea of employment, and frankly, just kind of reasoned that if a guy like me who really interviews well, honestly, and has these advantages of education and work history, has such a hard time finding quality employment, what's that battle going to be like for somebody who hasn't been as lucky as me? And that's where my nonprofit Recovery Career Services came from. I started in 2020 during the pandemic, and have luckily been able to through webinars and in-person things recently and personal coaching with folks, have been able to help hundreds of folks kind of get back on that employment journey and start to rewrite that story.
Very interesting. Excuse me. Thank you for sharing. What do you attribute your success in terms of getting sober and getting the upper hand on what you were going through? What do you attribute the success to? Was there a specific moment or anything that really struck you as, okay, now is the time, I'm going to do this and be able to get it done?
Frankly, it was just, I'd had enough pain. I'm a really funny, weird individual in a couple of ways. So, the first way, which maybe some folks can respond to or can relate to, is that I respond to pain, the avoidance of pain, feeling pain, consequences, really kind of motivate me to do anything. If it's easy, I'll take it. If it's painful, I'm typically going to avoid it. And I had frankly just reached a point in my life where I had suffered enough pain and I wanted to do something different. There wasn't a magic moment. I didn't get arrested again. I didn't get kicked out of some place, or there wasn't some big incident. It just really was the accumulation of so many things that had been happening for years and years and years. By the time I started trying to get sober, I'd been using alcohol and hard drugs for well over a decade. So this was it. It isn't one of these things where it happened. I did drugs for a little while and then I just decided to get sober. It really was just a bunch of experiences, and I was kind of sick of it, quite frankly. But it wasn't just me. I've had a ton of help along the way, and my recovery journey has not been a straight line. I've relapsed, definitely, and that's the story for a lot of folks. I've had setbacks, but I knew that what I was working towards was always going to be better than what I was coming from, because what I was coming from was the worst. I don't know that people really understand what homelessness is like and what it's about. And that was just a dark road I didn't want to go back down again. So I got lucky. I was sick of being tired. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, as they say, and had a lot of help. A lot of organizations that stepped up and helped me, and a lot of friends and family and strangers that showed up at just the right time in my life to kind of help me on that journey. I feel really, really fortunate.
So you alluded to some of your challenges when you were coming back into the workforce in terms of a gap on your resume and criminal convictions. Are those typical, what are sort of the typical impediments that people run into when they try to get back in the workforce?
Well, the primary impediment is bias. It's a bias that employers have, employers, hiring managers, HR people have against folks who have criminal convictions, because they quite often will lump everyone into one category. And the truth is that, it's pretty easy to get a criminal conviction in this country. I don't know if people realize it. So just some statistics to throw here. Yeah. Number one, the FBI says that there are somewhere between 70 and 77 million adults in this country that have criminal conviction. That's 1 in 3. And that's more people than actually have bachelor's degrees, to give you an idea of the scope of that. Add to that the fact that there's just a bunch of laws in this country. It's pretty easy to actually end up with a criminal conviction. And often the difference between those who have criminal convictions and those who don't is simply luck. So if you have ever gotten behind the wheel after you've had too much to drink, but didn't manage to get a DUI and didn't get in a wreck, well, you're kind of lucky. If you've ever smoked a little weed before weed was legal in a lot of places in this country and didn't get caught, you're pretty lucky. And if you ever got into a physical altercation in your life, but didn't end up with assault charges, you're kind of lucky. So often what people think is that if somebody has a criminal conviction, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, that they must be a person of poor character, or this is someone that can't be trusted. So it's that bias that folks often face that is the biggest obstacle to actually finding employment. Before I got the janitor job, I had an interview with a large national company for a job that I was frankly overqualified for, but they told me that I was the best candidate that they had. Went through the entire process, met with the hiring manager. Hiring manager told me she would hire me on the spot if she could. but all I had to do was get through this background check. And when the background check came back, despite the fact that all I have is misdemeanors, they said, come back in 7 years. That's kind of rough to be told to come back in 7 years. And it can be discouraging for a lot of folks. And that's the biggest obstacle that most of the folks that I coach and that I'm fortunate enough to be able to help kind of deal with.
Okay, so I'm in the position of hiring people, and I know a lot of our listeners are as well, right? Either in a managerial capacity or as a founder, co-founder of a small or medium-sized business. What are the keys to getting over this bias? Because again, as I preface the conversation, I'm like, I believe people can change as well, but when we have these classifications, or it's just, I don't know. Do we need to have some type of company or organization help us classify these things? Like, what are the types of things? How can we get over some of these biases? Because to me, again, I'm just putting my personal, I'm trying to be honest, put my personal, things out there. It's like, when I hear criminal conviction too, it's like, oh, okay, what pattern is that indicating, right? Or whatever, and whether that's obviously not good in this case, but it's there. How do we get over this?
Well, I think there's a few things that employers should keep in mind. So the most common objection that I hear from employers and hiring managers is the risk involved in hiring somebody that has a criminal conviction. And I just want to be clear. There's a risk involved in hiring any employee. Right. It's just a matter of how we mitigate that risk, right? So since we know there's risk, then with any employee that we get off Indeed, we're going to check references. We're going to pull a background check. We're going to do certain things. So that's the first thing. Let's get that out of the way. The other thing is that the best way to overcome bias is curiosity. So often what I ask employers to do when I'm doing consulting is slow down. That's the first thing. So when you see somebody that has a criminal background, don't just automatically have a policy or have a judgment in your head that says that this application is now going in the round 5. What you need to do is slow down a little bit and take the opportunity. Now, this only applies if they're actually the right person for the job. So if they're qualified, if they're the best candidate for the job, and you're committed to having the best workforce that you can, I would argue that what you need to do is slow down when you get those folks that might have something on their criminal background, and just ask some questions. So ask them some questions about what happened with this particular criminal conviction or convictions, as the case may be. But then the second question is actually more important. What's been happening in your life since that happened? Because as you mentioned, Mike, people can change, right? But we also need to give people an opportunity to explain to us how they might have changed. If you run across an applicant who has 2 or 3 criminal convictions for, let's say, drug possession in the last couple of years, and as you start talking to this person, you ask them what's different in their life, they make it clear to you, I've entered a 12-step program. I work with a sponsor. I go to counseling. I've connected with my church or my family. And oh, by the way, here's a couple of recommendations from folks that kind of know me, that aren't my family. This is somebody you should probably seriously consider. But unless you get curious and are committed to providing folks an opportunity to provide you data that might demonstrate they're living their lives a different way than they did before, it's going to be a non-starter. People aren't going to get opportunity. So it is that mental commitment and saying that I'm going to slow down. I'm going to ask just a couple of questions. I'm not saying you spend another week with somebody. Spend like an hour with them. Try to get a sense of who they are. You can probably get some good data, and then you can at least base your decision on having more information versus having this preconceived notion and simply acting on a judgment.
Yeah, I a couple of things that you said there that just piqued my interest and curiosity was first, slow down. I love that. Because it doesn't take a whole lot of extra investment to just ask a few questions. And I think that the questions that you asked are super key too, because slow down. Well, what do I need to ask here? Do I need to tiptoe around this? How do I need to do this? But it's just what's been happening in your life since then. I think that's fantastic because again, I come a little bit from the VC world, and there's a really famous venture capitalist that says, I invest in lines, not dots. And he's referring to like a chart, right? Data around different data points in a startup's lifespan, but here we're applying it to a person's lifespan, right? Or what they've done. And that's always stuck with me as well, because that's indicating that people can change. Okay, this one data point happened, but let's get a few other data points. Where's the trajectory of this going, and what's likely to continue in the future? So I love those two things.
Well, and Mike, I'll just jump in. The other thing I would add here is that there is also a right person, right job attitude that needs to be instilled in hiring managers and employers. And what I mean by that is, not every person that has a criminal conviction and not every type of criminal conviction is going to be right for every position. So if you get somebody who shows up to apply and they had a couple of auto theft convictions in the last 5 years, and you're maybe hiring them for a driving position, well, maybe not. Or if they've got DUIs in the last couple of years, maybe that's not the right position. But if somebody shows up to work for your company in a sales capacity, or they show up to work, in the warehouse or something, and they have, some criminal convictions in the last couple of years for possession, or maybe even low-level theft, depending on what the position is and where they are and what they have access to, by asking some of the right questions, and again, looking at the person, the position, and how long ago those crimes occurred, maybe this is somebody you should consider. In the world of second chance employment, as we call it, we call that nature, time, nature. So you look at the nature of the criminal convictions, you look at the time since those have occurred, and then you look at the nature of the position for which they're applying to see if it makes sense to provide somebody an opportunity. But again, unless you slow down and are committed to having the best workforce you can, regardless of criminal background that doesn't apply to the job, you're going to have a hard time making those decisions.
Yeah, I think I read on your website you say second chances aren't charity; they're an investment. And
absolutely.
And coupling that with this idea of just curiosity, what it sparks in my mind is as a person who's hired a number of people across different industries, like when someone gives you that feeling like, oh, they would be good, they would be great in our culture or whatever, right? Like that's rare. And to have the curiosity to go a step further and say, I need to figure out what this particular mark, may be on their resume, right? Like that can be applied to anybody also, not just somebody who may have a criminal conviction. So that just general curiosity and going the extra mile and being a coach instead of a hirer, right? Like I always look at my role as being a coach, and coaches invest, in developing people. And I think that's just like super, super important. And I love that. But I would also say, I think I'm assuming you would say that it's not all on the hiring people, right? Like, how do you coach an individual to tell the story? I'm assuming there's going to be some form of, let's get ahead of this. Let's get this stuff out in the open, so there isn't a big bomb at the end of a background check, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, number one, I always encourage people to tell the truth. But be strategic about when you tell it and what you tell. And what I mean by that is, so often, people who are turning their lives around, they want to be honest. They want to be honest to the point sometimes where they walk into an interview and they just verbally bomb it all over the interviewer and tell them a whole bunch of stuff that they don't need to tell them right up front. So, let's be strategic about when we tell it and what we tell. And so when I say about when we tell it, the best time that I think to reveal that you may have some criminal history is after the first interview, but before they run a background check. And it does a couple of things. And there's, sometimes you can figure out if they're going to run a background check and sometimes you can't. But that's really the best timing. And the reason why is because you've now given them an opportunity to kind of see you and talk to you in an interview, decide if you're somebody they want to move forward in the process. But then you want to be honest and just give them a brief statement about the fact that you have criminal convictions. Something like, I just want to make sure you know that when you run my criminal background check, that you're going to find some criminal convictions in my past. I'm a different person than I was then. I'm committed to living my life in a different way. Some statement like that, because then it gives the applicant an opportunity to take credit for being honest, which is kind of important, as opposed to them running the background check and finding some stuff, and then it kind of looks like you left some stuff, you tried to hide it in some way. The other thing is that there's 4 elements when constructing either a letter of explanation about criminal past, or if you're going to talk to somebody about it. That I used in my own life that worked really successfully, and this is what I advise my clients to do. So the first thing you want to do is you want to talk in kind of a really high level way about what happened. In my particular case, it would be something like, from 2014 to 2016, I was homeless and suffering with addiction on the streets of Seattle. It was during this time that I picked up some criminal convictions. So this very kind of high level view, but now the employer knows some important stuff. They know I was homeless, they know I've got criminal convictions, and that those things were tied to my time on the streets. So first, you want to talk about it at a really high level and give the facts. The second thing you want to do is you want to pivot and start talking about any ways that your life is different. And so, as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, if you have entered a 12-step program, if you maybe had a violent crime in your past and you took anger management classes and you have a certificate where you graduated, anything that you can do to demonstrate that you're living your life a different way. And that could include volunteering. It could be it being in recovery. It could be going to church. It could be working a few different jobs. It could be a bunch of stuff. So first, you give an overview of kind of what happened. Second, you demonstrate the ways that your life has changed. Third, you want to talk about any new skills or mention any recommendations that you have from any other work you've done. So this can be from actual work, it can be from volunteering, it can be from someone in the community who is trusted and is willing to vouch for you. And then the final thing, which a lot of folks forget, is that employers don't post jobs because they're just trying to pay money to people for nothing. Employers post jobs because they have a need. And so the last thing that you want to do is you want to finish up your explanation by making it clear to the employer that you can fulfill that need and that they should consider you strongly. So that's the 4 things. Number 1, high level view of what happened. Number 2, how's your life different today? Number 3, any new skills or any recommendations that you have. And then finally, you want to bring it back to the employer and tell them why you're the person that they should consider for that position. I have found that, and my clients have found that to be a really effective way to kind of talk about any criminal convictions. So it gives them a chance to kind of think through it and get their story straight in a lot of ways.
And in case I just missed this, when do you recommend this happen? At the end of an interview, or after, completely after?
So this is going to be after the interview. So you're going to, at the end of the first interview is when you're going to kind of let them know that if they're going to run a background check, that they're likely to find some criminal history. Then at that time, you can offer to provide a letter of explanation, or if they want you to give more of a verbal explanation about it, you can do that at that time. Most companies are going to actually want you to provide something in writing just for legal purposes. So they have it in the file and they can use it to evaluate whether you're an appropriate candidate for employment. But you definitely want to bring it up after that first interview. I wouldn't say you bring it up before that, because you might run across a company that isn't going to run a background check. And if they're not going to run a background check, there really isn't any reason to divulge anything that might eliminate you from consideration for employment.
Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk for our listeners who are employees and maybe may have peers, right, struggling with addiction. I'm curious, how would you advise them? How can they be of help and of service to a peer, coworker? You can start by talking about how maybe you were helped, or just however you recommend people help others around them.
Well, this is going to sound really weird, but the first thing you can do is not gossip about the struggles that somebody might be having. That may sound like a strange thing to say, but I had the opportunity in 2009 to use my company's employee assistance program and go to rehab. And when I came back to the company, that first day walking in, I had all these anxieties about, are people going to know? What are they going to say? What's that relationship with my boss going to be like? What's that relationship with my coworkers going to be like? So I had all these anxieties kind of in my head. In the the thing that really helped me transition back into the office was I had a couple of people that I had work relationships with before that I was able to confide in and let them know that I was struggling, that I might need their support. It wasn't, it wasn't a big conversation. It wasn't this heavy thing. I just kind of let them know, I really was vulnerable and honest about what was happening. But what really helped was that my company did a really, really great job of guarding my privacy. And so I didn't hear a lot of rumors. I didn't hear a lot of innuendo. And that is the biggest thing that I think people can do in the workplace is, mind your business is kind of a cliche thing, but if you're gossiping about the struggles that someone might be having, you're not helping that person. As a matter of fact, you're likely adding to the stress levels that they have. Now, the other thing that people will often ask me if when it comes to folks that are seeking employment. So I work for a company, but I don't have hiring and firing authority. How do I help somebody who's in recovery or somebody who has a past criminal record that is looking for work? The best thing that you can do for them is advocate. And what I mean by that is, if there's somebody that you know in your life who is trying to turn their lives around and you think they're doing the right things, they are living their lives a different way than they did before, and they're really making efforts, then to the best that you can, you should advocate for that person. And that means if there's a position that comes up at your company that you think they might be right for, you should talk to your boss about it and let them know, I think this is somebody that we should seriously consider. If that's at another company and you know someone that you can connect them with, to the best of your ability, advocate on behalf of that person and help them get their start. What is common in every comeback story, whether it's in real life or whether it is a movie, is that there's always this person or this group of people that show up in somebody's life to help them get to that next step on the path. And you can be that person. You can be the person that helps make a difference in someone getting from where they are to where they want to go. But you can only do that if you step up and advocate on their behalf. And I assure you that everybody who is watching this knows somebody who is either in recovery and looking to put life back together, or has a criminal record and is looking to put life back together, because there's just too many of us out there for you not to know somebody, quite frankly.
Yeah, the statistics that you mentioned pretty much ensure that, which is really, really interesting. So I'm a little, I'm obviously very ignorant on this entire subject. For someone listening who is struggling with addiction and worried about keeping their employment or gaining employment, what resources are out there? Obviously, the work that you do. What other resources are out there and free and accessible for people who are maybe struggling with this idea of getting back in the workforce?
Well, I'm free and accessible. All the services that we provide to individuals are absolutely free of charge because we're funded by donations. And so that enables us to do that work. So feel free to reach out to me at recoveryandwork.org. That's the website. And you can, I'll be happy to set up an appointment and chat with you. There are also, there are a number of other, local resources that you can reach out to. So I think this is going out nationwide, worldwide. Yes. But you could search out any recovery meetings or recovery programs in your area. If you are struggling with alcoholism or addiction, of course, there's a ton of 12-step programs. I'm not a representative of or a spokesperson for any 12-step or recovery programs, but there is lots of help out there for folks that may be struggling. Sometimes the first place that you can start to ask for help is kind of whoever is closest to you that you trust. Now, this might not necessarily be a family member in some cases, depending on what your family situation is. It could be a friend. It might be a member of your clergy. It could be an HR person. The first step is always, if you think that you're having an issue, is just kind of, ask for help, kind of think about it and really examine whether this is something you should take more of a look at. I would say that, well, here's what I would say. For me, when I knew that I had a problem, now I wasn't ready to do anything about it when I recognized that I had a problem, but when I knew that I had a problem was when I started sacrificing things in my life that should have been important in order to consume alcohol and drugs. I stopped showing up for family events. I was calling in sick to work more than I should have. I wasn't showing up and being present in my life. And that was when I realized that, maybe this is a problem. Maybe this isn't just fun anymore. But I wasn't ready to ask the questions yet. because I wasn't ready to do anything about it yet. It doesn't cost anything to be curious and get more information. So if you think that maybe there's an issue, just, ask some folks about it. That doesn't mean you got to go to rehab. There's a great distance between where you are now and going to 28 days of inpatient rehab, but it's that curiosity again. Having more data never hurt anybody.
Do you have any examples of companies that you think are the model for second chances, investing in second chances, as you kind of put it? Any come to mind?
Yeah, Mod Pizza does a great job of providing folks with second chance employment opportunities. They really have built their entire culture and their company on one of providing people second chances. And as a result, a huge percentage of their workforce are folks that are in recovery or have past criminal justice involvement, formerly homeless, or all three. And they've grown like crazy over the last few years, but it's because they have bought into the fact that everybody deserves a second chance. People can change, and have given the opportunity and the right support, most people will change. So they are a shining example of a company that has bought into what that means as a culture, and they've grown by leaps and bounds as a result.
Really interesting. I have one close to me in my area. I think I'm going to start going there a little bit more after hearing that. I appreciate that.
They do a great job.
For people listening who want to learn more about you and what you do, you mentioned the website already. Are there other places on the interwebs, as they say, that folks can seek you out and find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I think there's a few Ty Reeds on LinkedIn, but I'm certainly the only one who looks like me, so I'm pretty easy to find. And of course, if people just want to call me directly, I know this is very rarely done, but you can call me directly on my personal cell, 253-347-1611. Happy to provide any information or support that I can to folks who may need it. Even if you're a family member that just has concerns about someone who may be struggling, I'm happy to provide whatever insight that I can.
Excellent. I think that LinkedIn handle is Ty Reed MBA. And if I get that wrong, we'll make sure we get it corrected in the show notes, and we'll provide links to everything Ty has mentioned here in our show notes. Ty, really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for the great work that you do.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it, Mike.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.